Do you think that a big part of why Russia has rebounded and even exceeded before the invasion is because of China? Because it seems like that's where a lot of the demand is going toward. That's, to me, curious in light of the rivalry that those two countries had for so long. Do you think that this romance, if you will, between China and Russia is going to be durable because they have a shared enemy in the West? That's my first question. And then second, if I may, can you talk about a little bit, you said that Putin feels emboldened when he sees weakness. Do you think Joe Biden incentivized him through his very haphazard withdrawal of Afghanistan to basically project weakness? And then also his energy policy. Do you think not only Biden's, but the West and Germany and the heavy reliance on Russia for energy, and then Biden restricting energy for development, do you think in some ways that kind of incentivized or emboldened Putin even more?
Both questions excellent. Many thanks, Carrie. So certainly, Russia, China, we are unlike the situation when Nixon goes to China during the Cold War, when the United States has been very successful in decoupling, if you will, China from the Soviet Union. I'm sorry. We right now really see these two main geopolitical challengers of the United States, of the international liberal order, combined. And certainly, China's factor plays a huge role in this war. China, by the way, is very careful not to violate sanctions directly, at least in the open. There might be something going behind the curtains, but on the surface, they mostly provide dual goods and other types of goods that are now no longer available for Russians because of the Western sanctions. Like everything, you name it, right? The car industry, for example, is almost entirely now dominated by Chinese vehicles. But it gets more than that. Semiconductors and chips, in particular, are mostly imported from China now. Either Chinese company either serve as intermediaries or just directly produce those components that Russia needs. Just to give you some numbers, the shipments from China are up 64% from 2021 to 2023. And in general, Russia's trade with China right now has reached a record $240 billion. This is it's faster actually than even they projected themselves. I think Putin boasted, about this during his interview with Tucker Carlson. So in general, yes, China plays a huge role. Having said that, it goes beyond China. There are other countries, North Korea helping with artillery, artillery shells, munition. There's Iran with Shahed drones, also potentially also missiles and more. There's other countries of the global south, or the so-called global south, where again, the sanction circumvention creates a lot of lucrative opportunities for multiple states across the world. And we seem to have failed in the West to sell this war to these other countries as being quite existential for this liberal order. I mean, they don't probably see themselves as being on the losing side if this international liberal order does not exist anymore. And as you have seen over the last year already, we have seen the crumbling of this order with more and more conflicts emerging worldwide. I think it's like one of the gloomiest moment over the last decades in terms of the number of proliferation of the conflicts. That is, of course, Gaza and Israel. There is Nagorno-Karabakh situation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. There is now possibility of escalation between Venezuela and Guyana. You name it. Of course, there is China-Taiwan issues going forward. And unfortunately, with this situation, things can escalate real fast because essentially there is a spreading perception that the West, as this enforcer of the rules, is not very successful anymore. So it really does look as a very unpleasant moment these days. To your point on the role of the administration, I think certainly Putin acts when he sees weakness, and Afghanistan, judging by the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the really ugly picture that it provided, did find its reflection in the comments and statements by the Kremlin or associated mouthpieces. Where indeed they've seen it as as a sign that essentially the United States were not really in control of things anymore. Obviously, there were some failures in intel or certain prediction to predict how bad this whole withdrawal will unravel. Having said that, there are reasons to believe that the war in Ukraine was itself conceived of earlier. than that. And if anything, now there's like it's a murky conversation as to when exactly Putin decided to start this war. But for example, his article about this historical unity between Russia and Ukraine, that will be summer 2021, when in which he points out that he has no other choice but to essentially do something about this situation. Ukraine is becoming anti-Russia. It also echoes a lot of the points that he has made earlier. So in some ways, Afghanistan could have been a trigger, but it could not probably have been a decisive factor in that whole situation. On the energy policy, yes, we do see a lot of going back and forth between the different Western governments. Europe was a little bit like Europe in some ways deserves a lot of credit of being able to decouple itself with Russian oil, switch to alternative suppliers. But at the same time, it did take a year. And for 1 year in 2022, Russia has been receiving unprecedented oil revenues, completely unprecedented, which helped it recover for example, the amount of the central bank reserves, which were frozen by the West at the start of the war, right? So much for the sanctions policies and effectiveness. However, it does appear, specifically when it comes to the Democratic administration, that there is a lot of cautiousness and conflict between the energy policy, where they actually want to push the oil prices lower to decrease Russia's energy revenues, with the climate change agenda, right? When you don't want to kind of invest too much in, say, fracking, because hopefully there will be some green energy transition and whatnot. Beyond that, unfortunately, what we consistently see, and this is true for both parties, Democrats and Republicans, that the war has not really been internalized by the US establishment, meaning that this is just a war that a different country, Ukraine, is fighting of like somewhere in Eastern Europe, right? For God knows what reason. And as Putin has explained again in his Tucker Carlson interview, for reasons that started 1,000 of years ago, all these weird names and whatnot. So it's not the war that is highly important and existential for the United States in the context of the survival and defense of the international legal order. And that is why we consistently see the partisan consideration on the side of both parties, but Republican Party in particular lately, trumping the consideration of supporting Ukraine. And unfortunately, what we have seen with the situation with Ukraine aid package in Congress recently, there was an effort to pass it since October. And until now, it still has not been passed. Right now, it's being held off by the speaker, as we know. And Ukraine is losing as a result, literally. It's a matter of literally hours right now at this point, because Ukraine already is losing in Avdiivka. They have to ration their ammunition. In some instances, Russia shots about 10 times. It dominates by 10 times, or at least 5 times, the artillery that is currently at disposal of Ukraine. So we are literally talking about something that's unraveling now, and yet the partisan fighting still dominates in DC. So unfortunately, it does not just seem that the US politicians have awakened to the seriousness of what is really happening in the world.